like, was she really that unwell? Like, she's now driving to tennis. I had music blasting, like singing my heart out, and that was so far from the reality of my life for such a long time. But I really try and continue to share that to show both where I was and also like how far I've come, but also how far other people can come too in their recovery.
Hi, Amy.
Hi, Spencer.
Welcome to the podcast. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for inviting me on. I'm excited to talk all things migraine with you.
That's right. We are going to talk all things migraine. I'm really excited to share the information that you have, your expertise and experience. Let me get started a bit with giving a bit of a background of who you are. Welcome to the podcast, Amy Mowbray. She's the founder of the Migraine Life. She's a passionate migraine advocate and content creator who has transformed her own struggle with chronic migraine into a mission to help others. In 2015, at the age of 21, Amy's life was turned upside down when she was diagnosed with chronic migraine, experiencing debilitating attacks more than 20 days a month. This forced her to spend most of her time in bed, unable to work, exercise, or socialize. Through years of research, persistence, and self-advocacy, Amy found her way to remission from chronic migraine. As a creator of the online course Managing Migraine, Survive to Thrive, Amy teaches others everything she's learned about effective migraine management. Her approach, known as the Migraine Life method, combines education, treatment strategies, at-home management, communication, mindset work, and community support. Amy's goal is to help people take back control of their migraine and feel less alone. I love it.
That's right. It's so strange, actually, when you hear it all back in one go from start to finish. It's been a long old journey, but I'm pleased to be in such a good place now with things.
Yeah. And, so I follow you on Instagram. I love your account. It's very empowering. It's a lot of just tangible takeaways, which I obviously love in this account, this podcast. And one of them the other day was you driving in your car, listening to music, singing. I think you were going to play tennis maybe.
Yeah.
And you were just talking about kind of this full circle, how things have changed so much for you and really enjoying those days. I loved seeing that.
Yeah, I think sometimes I forget that not everyone who follows me on Instagram has followed me since I started at the beginning and has seen me. And I think sometimes, when I share about my recovery or even other people's recovery, it can seem like this quick overnight fix. And I think people even struggle sometimes to see me as this person, like, was she really that unwell? Like, she's now driving to tennis. I had music blasting, like singing my heart out. And that was so far from the reality of my life for such a long time. But I really try and continue to share that to show both where I was and also like how far I've come, but also how far other people can come too in their recovery.
Yeah, well, it's really helpful to share. And I think sometimes it's kind of scary to share those moments of when you're really sick or you're not feeling well. It's not that you're sharing them to garner sympathy, but you're trying to kind of show that this is the reality. And we'll talk more about kind of your reality of day to day and what your life looks like. What I'd love to start with is some statistics like I normally do at the beginning of these episodes. And let's talk about kind of migraines, and especially with women, because there's quite a high incidence of migraines in females. So migraine is a disorder of central nervous system regulation. It is 3 times more prevalent among women than men. The cumulative lifetime prevalence among women is 43%. Which means that if you pick 100 women, 43 of those women will have had a migraine in their lifetime. Migraine is the 4th leading cause of disability in women. I have seen some kind of other statistics that say maybe it's the 2nd, but it's definitely in the top 5. There is a clinical phase of a migraine with associated symptoms, and I have personal experience with this. I know you do as well. Together, all phases of a migraine attack can impact a patient for up to 7 days, which I think
or even longer.
Or even longer. Thank
for
you.
Some people, yeah.
Yes. There's two things I want to note about kind of what we're talking about with migraines and with headaches. So Tylenol in the United States is acetaminophen or paracetamol in other countries. It is the most common cause of liver failure in the United States. A lot of people get headaches and they take medication to help, and it becomes this really vicious cycle. And one other note I want to mention is that if you are experiencing a severe headache, which some say like the worst headache of their life, this could not be a headache. This could be like a brain aneurysm or a brain bleed, and you need to seek immediate medical attention because there are different types of headaches and migraines, and we're going to talk about all that now.
Yeah.
So
one point to say about that with a bad headache, a headache that you've never experienced in your life before, it's completely different. That's when we need to look at whether it's secondary. So I'll dive into why migraine is very different, but that's like everything you just described is when to seek emergency and medical attention, because it could be something secondary, like you say, a bleed on the brain or lots of other horrible things actually as well. So it's really important.
Okay, fantastic. Well, let's get into that, and then we'll get kind of into your story. So how about you talk about what are migraines? How do they differ from a headache? I know there's some words like aura and things like that. Yeah. I'll let you get into that.
Of course. So I actually want to take it right back a step, and this isn't going to be a criticism on you or the language you use, but it's so important, and it's something we're really trying to shift in the migraine community, and that is to drop the S with migraines. Most people in the migraine community advocating now, we are trying to move away from saying migraines, because migraine is this neurological disorder that people live with all of the time. It's not something you just experience when you have a migraine attack. It's something all the time. So if you think of another condition like asthma or epilepsy, we don't say, oh, I'm having epilepsies or I'm having asthmas. When people have a flare-up, they have an asthma attack or a seizure or a fit with epilepsy. The same applies to migraine. So for people like myself who've had it chronically for years, or people right on the other end of the spectrum who maybe have only had one migraine attack in their life, we like to now describe it as that. And some people still say migraine episode, but they're having a migraine attack, but they actually live with migraine all of the time. It's a condition, a neurological condition that is inherent to them. Does that make sense?
Okay, absolutely. Yeah. It definitely does.
So that's kind of the starting point, and I think that really helps to break down some of the initial stigma around that migraine is just this like bad headache that people get from time to time. So migraine by definition in the medical world is a primary headache disorder, which just means it's not secondary. It's not coming from something else going wrong in the body, like an aneurysm or a brain in the bleed or a structural issue in your neck even. It's not coming from that. It's coming from the brain itself. That's what the primary aspect is. But it's much more complicated than that. We know that migraine actually creates this whole host of other symptoms in the body, and headache, if even present in migraine, and we'll touch on that in a minute, is only one symptom of the attack. So if you think of it as you started to kind of suggest with the stages of an attack, things like an aura, there's actually 4 key stages of a migraine attack. So in the days leading up to the main attack, or what people associate as the migraine attack, the headache, you have something called premonitory symptoms, and lots of people with migraine aren't even aware these exist because they're several days before they even think of having the migraine attack. But this can be changes in mood. It might be, for me, I used to suddenly feel very irritable and like turn into a bit of a grizzly bear in the kind of hours or days before I'd have a full-blown migraine attack. It could be food cravings. It could be people start getting some sensitivity to light, to noise, to sound. It can be needing to wee more often. Suddenly, if you're going to the toilet all the time. Excessive yawning is a very common premonitory symptom. There are so many. And this is just really important if you do have migraine attacks to start trying to become aware of these symptoms, because the earlier that you're aware an attack is happening, the sooner you can treat, and the more likely you're going to have an effective treatment plan if you can get on top of attacks earlier. And then about a third of people with migraine will then move into what's known as the aura stage of an attack. And most people think about this as a visual aura, which is a common type of aura, but this can actually be any sensory disturbance in the body. So some people will experience numbness down one side of the face, or even further into the body. They might get kind of pins and needles or tingling in their hands and their feet. And a really common misconception about migraine is that you have to have an aura for it to be a migraine attack. This is just not true. And it actually prevents people from getting the help they need, because they say, oh, I have this thumping headache and I'm throwing up and I'm sensitive to light and noise, but I don't have the aura, so it's not migraine. And I'm like, like so many people don't have it. Like I said, only about a third do. And then, that stage typically lasts for about an hour maximum. It will vary. Some people will have it longer. Some people will only be a few minutes. And then you move into the main attack phase, which is what everyone thinks of when we talk about a migraine attack. So this is typically where you have the worsening of the head pain. It might be you have nausea, vomiting, upset stomach. And also this is typically where movement becomes something that makes the pain worse. It's where you get most of your light sensitivity, noise sensitivity to pretty much anything in your environment during this phase. And after this, you actually move into then what's called the prodrome. Migraine really gives it to you. It's like it goes on and on and on. And again, this is a really important phase that lots of people aren't aware of, and they're kind of almost, I think, try and get back to normal as quickly as possible, because the pain tends to have lifted for people. They've stopped being sick. They're starting to feel a bit better. But the post-drome phase of an attack is what we more commonly call the migraine hangover. And this actually can really impact people and still debilitate people for a number of days after the main attack has finished. And you kind of feel a bit like you would with a hangover. You feel groggy, you feel tired. I just wanted to eat all of the beige food that I could possibly get, all of the carbs, like all of the sugar, everything that's not really great for you. That's what I would crave in that phase. And again, it's really important people are aware of this, to just allow themselves some grace and also appreciate, sometimes when we talk about the frequency in which we're having attacks, sometimes people will just report the day in which they had the main attack, but actually they were probably impacted the day before, and they were also probably impacted the day after. And even just having this awareness can really help in all aspects of life, communicating to your work why maybe you didn't get everything done the next day, or to your partner, like why you've been a bit ratty with them. It just really helps connect the dots. And when you have that understanding as a patient and then can actually communicate it with other people in your life, it really does also help to reduce the stigma that it's just, oh, you had a bad headache for a couple of hours.
Right. Yeah. I do think that there's a stigma, and I like how you've explained the migraine, that it is a disease, and that it's something that it's not just one time and that's all. I know for me in the past, when I have suffered a migraine attack, the days before I get very sensitive to sound. I remember being in a restaurant once, and there was a woman who was stacking plates, and I thought it was the loudest sound I'd ever heard. I couldn't believe everybody wasn't staring at this woman to say, like, why are you making so much noise? But it was what was going on. And I think it was a few days before. Normally for me, I get quite irritable and quite sensitive to sounds. And even like small sounds, like chewing noises. I mean, like little things really do get under my skin, and I think maybe something's happening. So it's always good to listen to those small signals from your body.
Yeah, and it's really interesting you share about sound, because for the first few years when I was just progressing and getting worse and worse with chronic migraine, everyone was talking about light sensitivity. That was like the thing. Oh, everyone's sensitive. And at that point, yes, I was sensitive to light, but it got way worse, basically. Yeah. It hadn't really reached the full. And sound was the thing that was the biggest issue for me. I used to eat my dinner in bed alone because I couldn't cope with the sound of other people eating. I couldn't cope with their crockery. And I couldn't even cope with the sound of myself eating and the crockery. I had to have earplugs in bed eating my food. So sensitivity to sound can be a a really debilitating symptom. And like you say, I think you described it perfectly. It's almost like your brain is amplifying it. And to you, it sounds like it's, the loudest thing in the world and the most annoying thing in the world as well.
That's important. It is. Yeah. It's very annoying. Let's talk about this because I would love to hear kind of about your journey and how you've gotten to where you are. And we can kind of talk about the experiences that you've learned along the way.
So growing up, I didn't have migraine attacks. I was quite a headachy teenager, so I would get kind of more like tension headaches from time to time. And I played a lot of tennis, so sometimes if I'd been playing in the sun for too long or something like that, I would get a bad headache, but nothing like what I now know is kind of associated with migraine, and it didn't debilitate me for any length of time. I had my first migraine attack when I was, how old was I? 20, just before I was 21. So the year before I became chronic, and I was actually working at Wimbledon tennis at the time, and I got a really extreme visual aura. I kept saying to people, the screen looks fun. Does anyone else think the screen looks funny? Like, what's going on with the TV in this room? And this actually developed over the course of, I've just told you an aura lasts an hour. This aura actually developed over the course of several hours, and gradually my vision just got worse and worse. And at this point I had no headache, no other symptoms. It was very frightening at the time because I'd never had anything like that before. And by the time I got home from work at my local station, I actually had to get a taxi, just like a short 5 minutes up the road, because I couldn't see. I was really scrambling around. By the time I got back, I had this thumping headache. I went to bed. I took some probably paracetamol at the time and slept it off. And that was it. I thought it was very strange at the time, but kind of didn't think too much of it. And then fast forward about, 6 months or so later, I'd graduated and I'd started working up in the City of London in a graduate job. And on the 2nd of January 2015, it was such a memorable day. I just woke up with a headache. And at the time, I thought it's probably a bit of a delayed hangover from New Year's Eve. I'm just a bit groggy. I'm a bit tired. But this headache didn't go away. It just stayed with me day after day after day. And at that point, it wasn't actually that migrainous in nature. It was just constant and there all the time. And, you do all the usual things. You're like, gonna get a good night's sleep. Even first day, I was like, gonna go out for a walk, get some fresh air. But as the weeks went on and I went back to work, it just didn't go. And I started to feel worse and worse and now I understand getting these other symptoms of migraine. But it was very sudden and very severe, which isn't necessarily the typical progression of migraine. People tend to, have attacks from time to time, and if it's not treated effectively or for various other triggers or changes, it could progress and get worse. For me, I was thrown straight in really at the deep end and became chronic overnight effectively. So the daily head pain persisted, and I didn't go straight into having 20 attacks a month. That kind of happened gradually over the next year or two. But within a few months, I was recording daily head pain all day, every day. And for people who haven't experienced that, it really is there all the time. And you start even thinking, am I going a bit mad? Like, have I forgotten what it's like? It's such a strange and really suffocating sensation to just have something that is like so all-consuming all the time. And I was having around 10 to 15 and like increasing full-blown attacks in the month over the next few months. And I saw doctors. Because it was so sudden, they did all, MRIs to check and rule out the secondary things like we discussed earlier. Do I have a bleed on my brain? Do I have any blood clots, anything horrible going on? And at the time, I was like desperate for them to find something. I'm like, there must be something in there. Like, what, you need to look again kind of thing. And I was almost disappointed. I feel embarrassed to say it now, but I was disappointed that they didn't find anything on the MRI. Like, what do you mean my brain scan's normal? I've got head pain all day, every day, and nothing you're giving me is getting rid of it. And that also, I think, leads into I myself didn't understand the severity and the complexity of migraine. I'm like, can't just be migraine. What do you mean it's just some migraine like attacks? Right. And that just, I really share that to show like I had a lot to learn, and I knew very little about migraine at that point. And really my own journey evolved from learning what there was to know about migraine and going through the medical system and really getting stuck on so many hurdles, going down so many wrong paths, looking for secondary issues elsewhere in my body. I think that's a very common place people stumble on. You know, I spent years looking at my neck, I spent years looking at my jaw, everything else going on, thinking that was causing my migraine. And actually the really big turning point for me was going back to being reminded that actually this is coming from my brain itself. It's a neurological disorder. All these symptoms elsewhere in my body, and you know, the brutal impact it was having on my life was coming from the brain itself, and that I needed to go back to treating the brain, treating my migraine as the neurological disorder it is, which is something you'll see me talk about a lot on my page, to actually then find relief. But I guess I didn't really touch on the impact. Over those first initial years, I had to give up my job. I spent most of my time in bed. I was unable to drive. I was unable to play tennis, to socialize. If I did see my friends, they would either come and sit with me when I was in bed, or if I ever did, you know, make it out and go and do something, there was usually a real flare up in my symptoms afterwards. So it was it was just a really traumatic time. It was so different from the life I had been leaving and the life I was like hoping for myself in my early 20s.
Yeah. It's so interesting hearing you talk about this, because I was writing some things down as you were speaking about, like for me, I remember when I went in my 20s, I had quite severe chronic migraine, and I had a drawer of sunglasses, like massive, huge sunglasses for when I would have to go out into the light. Now I maybe have 2 pairs of sunglasses, but back then I probably had 10. And it was like, okay, which grade, how big do I need today to be able to get from the house to the car? You forget these things that
you do.
That you really suffer through these things. And I think that I very much resonate with saying you were hoping that they could find something, because when you go through something that's affecting your life so much, there's this feeling of, am I crazy that this is so severe for me? Because it feels like there needs to be some very heavy diagnosis to correlate with the symptoms and the way that it's affecting my life. So I understand that when things come back normal, you think, am I doing this to myself? And it can really start to spiral. And I do really believe that mental and physical health, they're very much intertwined. And I have a feeling we'll talk about that in a bit, about kind of ways that you can manage and cope with this type of limitation to your life. But yeah, I really do understand that a lot.
I think the stigma plays into that as well, because even when I gave the example of, you know, epilepsy and, you know, we're talking about dropping the S on migraine, I think if someone's diagnosed with epilepsy, they're probably not going, oh, what else is going on? You've missed it, because that is really seen as this, you know, serious neurological disorder, whereas most people, unfortunately, don't see migraine in that same way. And I think that is also, even like unconsciously, part of the reason people are still always searching. They're like, it can't just be migraine. Like it's really severe. It's really bad. It's impacting me every day. Like it's got to be something more than that. And when you learn about migraine, you start thinking, oh my goodness, like actually this is really serious. It can be really severe. It is, you know, one of the leading causes of disability for women.
Yes.
But there is still, I think, work to be done to kind of close that gap and reduce the stigma, so that people, even patients who are experiencing it, take it as seriously as it is.
Right. And I think also, you know, I do a lot of research about different female-led diseases, and like menopause, for example, there's very little support in the workplace for women going through menopause, and it's very challenging, and women are quitting their jobs because they can't get through work and menopause, they can't balance it. And I think also, you think of employers, you say, I can't come in today, I have a migraine, and it's kind of like, you have a headache, you need to come into work. Yeah. But like you're saying, it's the kind of bad association of like a migraine as a headache. Okay, let's talk about so through your research, your personal experience, we've talked about some of the symptoms of migraine. What have you found could be common triggers for people suffering from migraine? Because like you say, these symptoms start earlier than the actual, what we think of as a migraine. But what can even come before that can trigger the whole cycle?
There can be many triggers, and it's really important first, I think, if you're someone listening who doesn't have migraine, to understand that triggers aren't the cause of someone's migraine. So telling someone like, well, you had a wine last night, that would have caused you to have a migraine attack. Well, it's actually a trigger. That person already lives with migraine. They already have that genetic predisposition, but there are things that can trigger off that cycle in your brain and for a migraine attack to actually happen. So there are so many triggers, and they are really personal to the individual. And this is also a common, I think, trap people fall into when they first get migraine, because they'll Google migraine triggers and they'll think like, these are all the things I need to avoid, and I just need to like stay away from cheese and wine and caffeine, and that will sort me out. Triggers are so personal. So they can be anything from things I just said, but they could be the weather. Lots of people are very sensitive to changes in barometric pressure. Rain, wind was weirdly a big one for me, which isn't particularly common, but I found like really windy weather was triggering. Hormone fluctuations are a big one. Light and noise sensitivity can be, or not sensitivity, sorry, just light and noise can be triggers, as well as actually symptoms of the attack, which can be a slightly tricky one to unpick, but they can be very triggering. Certain scents are triggering to some people. And stress, I think, is the other big one, whether that be emotional or physical stress. That was certainly my biggest trigger. And sometimes that's actually one people discover later. They kind of focus on all of these other things, but stress, and also anything where your typical routine has been disrupted. So changes in sleep patterns, even changes in kind of exercise, movement, times of day you're eating, anything that kind of shifts you out of your normal routine can be a trigger. Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm curious what you mentioned wind. What are some other specific triggers that you experienced that you were able to kind of connect the dots? Yeah, so I think this probably leads into a bigger, we could have a whole episode, I think, just on talking about triggers. But I think identifying these classic migraine triggers can be so helpful if people have episodic attacks. And that just means they're having attacks less than... like 7 or 8 days a month, anything less than 15 headache days a month. And when migraine progresses, and in the way it did for me, I got to a point where I used to say all the time, everything triggers off my migraine. So taking a shower, washing my hair, watching TV, looking at a screen, bending forward, like literally everything. And now I understand migraine better, and I also understand something called central sensitization, which is basically where your brain learns to stay in pain, and it becomes so on high alert all the time. Some of these things that I used to call triggers and were triggering to my migraine aren't really the same as like these true classic triggers. It's really where your brain has become so sensitized that it is perceiving all of these different things. Just taking a shower, just like literally anything would trigger off my head, and that was enough to set it over my threshold. So I do really see it in a different way from, if someone always drinks a cup of coffee and that triggers a migraine attack for them, is very different from to a point where someone is chronic and life just seems to be triggering. And I think that's where really the advice we give to people with migraine needs to shift. The other thing that's really important to understand with triggers is, for most people, there's a build-up. So we normally blame a specific trigger. For example, having that cup of coffee, like that's what triggered my migraine. But we know that it's more complicated than that. And I always like to describe it as having either a bucket or a glass of water is normally the analogy I use to describe the build-up of your triggers. And if you think of a glass of water like this, and when you reach the top of the glass, thankfully we're not near it yet, then that's when your trigger is met, your threshold is met, and you would have a migraine attack. Well, every time you experience or you're exposed to your triggers, so for me it might be, okay, I had a bad night's sleep and that adds some water to the glass, and then I skipped breakfast, and then I had a stressful fight with my boyfriend, or whatever else, and this adds up slowly over time. And sometimes we just focus on the final trigger that tipped us into the migraine attack, when really it's actually this build up of triggers throughout our day. And normally when you tell people this, they're like, oh yeah, that makes sense. And it also helps to make sense of why sometimes you can have that cup of coffee and get away with it and feel fine, and other times you can't. It's, where are you on your threshold in that particular moment?
Sure. Yeah, I appreciate that. It's hard when you're in the moment and you don't feel well and you have these problems. It can be very overwhelming to go back and think, well, what are the patterns and the habits that I'm doing? For some of health issues, I've had to keep a food journal to kind of think about what I'm eating and try and track. I've eczema and things like that. It's helpful for, and it's funny because you don't realize the things that you eat. I mean, maybe some people are incredibly mindful about their eating, but sometimes you don't realize it until you start really writing it down, and you're very present then of saying, oh, I did have like 2 handfuls of that, like just mindlessly. I wasn't thinking about it. And so I can imagine it's the same probably with migraines and these migraine attacks, is that you're doing a lot of things that you don't realize are filling that glass until you become a bit more present and thinking about it.
Yeah, and I think it kind of can be both. I think it's really important for people to be aware of what their personal triggers are. Like if you know, getting a bad night's sleep for you, or a certain food or a certain drink, or any of the things we've discussed is a trigger for you, it is important and helpful to know so that you can take action and try and, do the things that are going to help. But it can also, and it made me think of when you talked about keeping the food diary, become a real obsession for people. And actually, this is where I fell into a trap. And I see it with so many other people. And it's one of the things I'm kind of most passionate about, I think, in educating people with triggers, is that they, first of all, will hear me talk about all these things and try and remove them all from their life, because they're like, these are all the things that are triggering, which isn't helpful, because if they're not triggers for you, it's pointless. Like, you don't need to avoid caffeine if caffeine isn't a trigger for you. You don't need to deprive yourself of chocolate if chocolate isn't a trigger for you. And of course, there is a bit of trial and error involved. But what happens, and especially as migraine progresses and your brain becomes even more sensitized, is people just start avoiding more and more and more. And what happens when people avoid more and more and more is their life just gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And you become miserable. You start pulling out of everything. And all that does when you start avoiding more is you teach your brain that the world is dangerous. Because you're like, well, I can't go out today, it's sunny. And that one time I got a migraine attack when it was sunny. Oh, I better not go. And actually you just reinforce to your brain that all of the world around you is dangerous. And actually this just feeds the cycle and makes things worse. So I really encourage people, yes, if you've got a few clear triggers, avoid them, do the right things to, have good night's sleep, whatever the thing is for you that's going to help. Yes, really important. But if you just feel like your list of triggers is ever growing, or if you're someone, like me, who's like, well, everything just sets off my head and like these things didn't used to, that's really a sign where avoidance of triggers isn't the best solution, and we need to take a very different approach.
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. It's funny because I'm going to kind of go to the other end of that, because for me, for example, in my migraine story, I was taking Excedrin migraine, which is a very strong medication in the States. I don't know if they offer it in the UK. They definitely don't have it here in Spain. It's a mixture of caffeine, aspirin, and Tylenol. I had it in every single purse that I carried. I had it. It was like in case of emergency, but I was taking it all the time. It was a Band-Aid treatment. I was drinking really large coffees throughout the day, which was then interrupting my sleep. So maybe even caffeine wasn't my trigger, more sleep was, and the caffeine was disrupting my sleep. And so I think for me, I just really pushed against lifestyle changes. I wanted to live the life I wanted to live. I wanted to go out and, visit with friends and stay up late and drink coffee through the day. And I was using Band-Aid treatments to treat the inevitable that ended up putting me in the hospital in my 20s for 5 days. So I think it's always important to see these things in moderation and kind of find these balances. And I'm kind of going to the other side. What you say kind of comes after what I say. Because then I reached a point where I had these really chronic migraine attacks and everything had to change, and then I became that obsessed person of what are my triggers, and so it's, for me, I also think it's nice to think about the nervous system, that it's calming the nervous system from different ways, right? So because a lot of these things are just the nervous system goes haywire, and when that happens, it makes you feel so out of control that you then want to control everything, right?
I think first of all, with the medication, like, it's the most common trap people fall into is taking, especially these combined painkillers with caffeine. And in the UK, there's a big push to, codeine is often part of these combination painkillers, and it's like, that's the thing to avoid. You do not want to get into that cycle of taking more and more frequent medication, and that can lead to all sorts of problems, rebound headaches. We call it now, instead of medication, overuse headache, which is quite blaming on actually the patient. We decided that term. The migraine community's moved around to medication adaptation headache, which is basically where the second the painkillers are wearing off, your brain just fires it off again. It's why people get stuck in that cycle. And then the other point really about the triggers is also to know that they don't have to be permanent. That's the other thing. People get very fixed on, well, this triggers me and this always triggers me. I was, as you've heard, like, so triggered by everything, and I am now at a point where I have overcome so many of my triggers, like even just talking about light, sound, movement, washing my hair, like stress, all of these things. I am now able to, I was about to say enjoy, not enjoy stress and washing my hair, but I can be exposed to it and it not trigger a migraine attack. And we can talk a bit more about, how to do that instead of just avoidance. But I want people to know that as well, because it can feel very, I think, doom and gloom of just like, oh, even, you having to go into prioritizing your lifestyle and like, oh, maybe I won't have the giant coffee and like maybe I won't stay up late. And yes, there's things to be mindful of. And yes, it might be, giving up a few things or being slightly more mindful about your lifestyle and your routine. But there is also no reason you can't enjoy a really full and happy life and eat the chocolate, have the glass of wine, like all these things, when you are more robust against your migraine and your threshold isn't so low.
Yeah. And I like these concepts of threshold and capacity, because just because your threshold is somewhere at that moment, it will not be like that forever. We are constantly adapting and changing, and our body is regenerating, and we're, changing our lifestyles, we're aging and growing. And so I think, being open to change and realizing that thresholds change, capacities change. I love that, we can kind of create this space to grow and build capacities for things. I mean, we're not the same forever. It's just not that way.
We're not. And when it comes to triggers as well, the advice from doctors, sadly, is still very much of just, you need to identify your triggers and avoid them. And it looks at a very kind of narrow view, I think, of migraine that is potentially helpful for a small population of everyone who lives with migraine, and kind of slightly misses the bigger picture.
I'd love to talk about that, actually, about kind of migraine management, because I've had my foot in Western medicine, holistic practitioners. I mean, when you live with chronic issues, a lot of times the just kind of blanket advice is not going to really fit for you. You have to kind of get more personal, find what works for you, and so you try different things. So I'd love to talk about kind of some ways that can help with migraine management, and that isn't just, well, identify your triggers, avoid them, and you'll be fine, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I kind of split everything, and medication actually comes into part of this, but I split migraine management into kind of two key areas that people can focus on. One is, how can you raise your threshold? How can you make sure that actually you're not having so much water in the glass all the time, other than just avoiding adding a new trigger in? And medications and medical treatments are one way to do this, but there are so many other ways you can raise your threshold. And this should be really exciting to most people because, like you say, a lot of the options when you go to the doctor is just like, take this pill, try this, So the main other way to really raise your threshold is changes in your lifestyle and routine. So first of all, there are things like supplements to consider. There are about a gazillion different supplements on the market, but there are some really good ones that are efficacy based. So magnesium at a high enough dose, riboflavin, coenzyme Q10, and also vitamin D. Now that's kind of been a newer one I've discovered over the last few years, but actually there's some really strong evidence that both ways, low vitamin D can be a trigger for people with migraine, but also supplementing with a high enough dose of vitamin D can also help. And fascinating research about how it can actually change levels of CGRP in the brain as well, which is just amazing for the migraine community. So supplements would be one. The other key area, which I kind of touched on before, is routine. The migraine brain loves routine. It really doesn't like when things change or things are a bit out of balance. And this is the most common reason people seem to get triggered, I think, when traveling. Because if you think about going away on holiday or traveling for work, everything is normally slightly at a different time. You know, you've probably woken up early or woken up late or something, and you're eating a different time. You're not eating your usual foods. There might be a jet lag element. It's kind of stressful as well, which doesn't help. Maybe you've had loads of caffeine that day to pep you up, you know, like all the things that kind of thing. But actually that change in routine can be a really a simple but quite difficult fix to be consistent with. But in terms of your sleep, so trying to go to bed at the same time each night and wake up at the same time each morning, that sounds really easy, but it's actually quite difficult for people, especially with weekends. So lots of people will tell me, you know, they've gone through their whole week absolutely fine at work, and they wake up on Saturday morning with a migraine attack, like, oh, no fair, what's going on? Sometimes just the lie-in on a Saturday morning could be enough to trigger that for people. It might also be, you know, they stayed up really late the night before and they had that glass of wine and the build up of stress over the week. But actually that lie-in can be a trigger for people. So that's one to be aware of with maintaining sleep routine. Exercise and movement can be incredible. People, myself included, used to absolutely roll my eyes when someone would tell me about exercise, because I'd be like, I am so debilitated by migraine, like telling me to excellent, Amy, I'm going to go for a walk. But actually there's incredible evidence. It's evolving all of the time, the research on this, but there was a very famous research study a while ago where they compared aerobic exercise with a preventative medication, and it was found to be, I can't remember if it was found to be more effective or just as effective as the preventative medication. And now we're seeing, you know, I think our understanding of exercise and movement is constantly evolving, but there's new evidence to support strength training as a preventative for migraine, as well as this aerobic movement. And I always encourage people, you know, to reframe what exercise looks like as movement, because if you are really debilitated by migraine, and I use this as myself as an example of, I was playing tennis, I was very active. There was no way I could do that, but I could gradually start walking. Even just around my house was like a big deal to start with, and then, you know, short walks, and really just building up some movement in your day is well, it just can be transformational. And I think it's a big one people overlook, either from feeling that it's not accessible to them or just thinking like, oh, what's the point? Like, it won't make that big a difference, but it really can be.
I really appreciate that. I was a big runner in my 20s and I loved running. And that's when the migraine attacks happened. And I was really scared to exercise when I started recovering. I was really scared to get my heart rate really high because then the blood would start pumping and I would think, oh my gosh, I think I'm feeling a headache. I think I'm feeling something coming. And it would just really start to, you talk about the kind of this obsession about things. Like it's scared to start pushing that threshold and pushing that capacity. And I think sometimes you have to realize that there's some uncomfortable feelings that will come with that, right? This is not just an upward slope of healing. Sometimes you go up and down, and maybe sometimes you exercise and you push it a little too far, and maybe it does trigger a migraine attack, but that doesn't mean it's going to happen every time, right?
Yeah. And I think especially with exercise, there are other things you can do to reduce that, whether that's, preparing physically, whether it's actually looking at the mental impact of like, how can you actually teach your brain in that moment that me walking around my house for 5 minutes is a safe thing to do, and it's not be so much in that perpetual cycle of scanning your head every second, is it getting worse, and driving that fear. But with exercise or movement, however you're going to frame it, it's usually about starting way smaller than you want to, because you don't want to be triggering it off. Yes, there is an element of like, okay, I'm in pain today, I'm going to get up and I'm going to move my body in some way. And like, I don't really want to do that. I want to lie under my duvet all day. So there is that element. But I also think with movement too, because of that fear element, and because it is such a trigger in itself, the movement, you really do want to be trying to build up kind of, I always say to people, do like half of what you're planning to do, whether that's like reps of something or time of walking, like just always scale it back less. It's far better to be able to like do that movement and it to be a kind of successful, like you've retrained your brain that it's safe, but actually you didn't get a migraine attack either, and you've stayed below your threshold. Obviously that is a lot harder in practice than it is. The other thing is, I like to talk about it more of regularly eating rather than getting into the specifics of diet. I think diet is a whole other area in the migraine world that can be very difficult to navigate. But from my research, my own personal experience, both helping people and getting better from migraine myself, I think actually eating regularly, eating enough protein is really important, and fats, making sure you're eating a balanced diet, and actually avoiding those big crashes. Like if you think of not having what I would eat in a post-drone phase, having those huge dips in your your glucose levels, you want to avoid those kind of huge ups and downs. So having a protein-based breakfast can be really helpful. If you're someone that wakes up with a migraine attack every morning, or that's when early morning you wake, sometimes having a snack before bed can be really helpful, because it could be that drop is actually triggering an attack for you. So just being mindful. Yes, there are certainly food triggers for people. Yes, some diets can be really helpful for some people, but it's not the first area I'd actually focus on for most people, unless you've got some very clear food triggers. I think again, it's a area that's very easy to get sucked into, and eating very restrictive diets. And again, it's another way of just becoming miserable and avoiding something in your life that maybe doesn't actually have all of the clinical evidence to back up the efficacy of it as well.
I appreciate that you say that, because for me, I've had autoimmune issues and migraine attacks and eczema and things like that. And a lot of the advice that I've been given to doctors is food journals and elimination diets and eliminating big food groups and things like that. And it's very stressful. I mean, it's just, and I almost feel like the stress it creates makes the problem worse than if you just didn't touch the food in the first place. I mean, I do believe in eating real food, and processed food does a lot of damage to the body. Science knows that. We absolutely now know that. But doing these really restrictive diets for me personally, I've found that it makes me very unhappy and very stressed.
Yeah. And the fear of the food or the trigger, it doesn't have to be food, can actually become more triggering than the trigger itself. One thing I would add about elimination diets for migraine, because they can be really eye-opening for some people, and it can really help. I have seen this. It didn't for me personally. But the most important thing to remember with these is they are not meant to be forever. And this is something people forget. They'll try, elimination diets are meant to be for quite a short period of time. They're slightly different, but normally only a couple of months. And then is when you start reintroducing foods back into your diet. You don't want to get caught. And I see this, unfortunately, all the time, where people have just removed everything. And that also has an impact. If you're not getting enough variety, the impact that has on your gut health and so many other things can be really catastrophic in other ways, never mind kind of the fear that can come with the association of certain foods as well.
Yeah. I did an interview with a practitioner about histamine intolerance, histamine intolerance and menopause specifically, because it can be very hormone related. And we talked about histamine foods. There's foods that are histamine liberators. There are foods that have high levels of histamine. You cannot go on a low histamine diet forever. You will become malnourished. You'll get scurvy and different problems and real imbalances in vitamins and minerals in your body. So it's always important to do things in moderation, do things under the guidance of a practitioner or somebody that can help you. It's the same with supplementation. Supplements can be such a blessing. They can help so much, but you can also get toxicity from supplements. You have to be very careful. Some interact with medications. Yeah. It's always important to be educated about what you're doing. Our bodies are really complicated, right?
Yeah, they are. And again, it is so personal. It's like, I know people who, just even when you say about supplements, just by adding in a couple of the supplements I mentioned, their migraine attacks have halved in frequency or more in severity. And it's just so about, one, focusing things that are evidence-based and they've got the efficacy to support them, but also there is always going to be some trial and error to find the thing, or usually the combination of things that are going to work and support you.
Exactly. One thing that I've seen that you've talked about on your page is some lamps and some glasses. Now, I'm very familiar with blue light. I've worked in front of a computer for years, and so I've had blue light glasses, but these block green light. Is that correct? Or it is green light? Can you explain about this?
So there's research. Dr. Burstein did some research from Harvard University about about green light for migraine, and it's the opposite. Green light is actually been found to help migraine. Okay. So most people, I feel like you have light sensitivity to migraine, will start as you did, and like I did, with all the giant sunglasses and wearing them more and more frequently. The problem with this, especially if you start wearing them inside, is you can actually can't remember what the phrase is now. I think it's called dark adapt your eyes. You make yourself more and more sensitive to light, essentially, because your brain and your eyes just get used to being in the dark. And it's why, if you think about being in a dark room and someone draws back the blinds suddenly, it's a lot. It's kind of the same thing with sunglasses. So actually, even though it feels like that's the most sensible thing to do, it can actually make your light sensitivity worse over time. And the same is with noise sensitivity as well. I spent years wearing earplugs and thought, I was protecting myself. I was keeping myself safe. I was minimizing it. I actually just made my noise sensitivity worse and worse for the same reason. So once people have kind of progressed from maybe I shouldn't be wearing sunglasses all the time, they normally stumble across Amazon and find blue light glasses. Yes. And we know blue light can be triggering for migraine, but it can also be helpful for so many people. We all sit and look at screens for too long. With Avulux glasses specifically, their research looked into that it's more complicated than that for migraine specifically. And there'd been other, I don't know if you've come across the FL41 glasses. They're kind of they're like red glasses, basically. Okay. So they make everything really red. And they became very popular about 10 plus years ago. And I tried all of these myself. I was wearing sunglasses. I tried the blue light glasses, maybe a bit of benefit, but not really. The red light glasses, just made everything red for me.
Yeah.
And by the time I tried Avulux, I was really skeptical because I was like, another pair of glasses, like, here we go. But they really changed my life during that period of time with screens, because I couldn't work on a laptop, I couldn't watch TV, and they enabled me to actually start working again because I could finally wear a laptop. So Avulux filter blue light, red light, and amber. I think that's the third one. Blue, red, and amber wavelengths of light, which have all been found to be triggering for migraine. But crucially, they allow in green light, which is a very specific wavelength of light, which has been found to be soothing for migraine. So they're like blocking, but they're also allowing in the good stuff. And they don't really, there's a slight change in what's the word? Like, I was going to say the shade. Like, they're not like sunglasses, but they don't distort the color, which I loved as well. But there is like a slight darkness, I guess, of them, but nothing compared to sunglasses. And the alley lamp that you've seen, I'm seeing green light bulbs everywhere now. It's not doing any of the filtering of the blue or the amber or the red, but it is leaning on the research that green light can be really soothing for people with migraine. So people can have it in their homes. It's really nice actually in the evenings as kind of part of people's wind down routine. But yeah, that's kind of like how the science works. And for me, as I said, like they really enabled me to be exposed to artificial light again. I would still wear sunglasses outside, which is kind of fine because that's what sunglasses are designed for. But in bright shops, in the hospitals, getting the train, like that awful strip lighting, watching TV, using laptops. You'll notice I'm not wearing them at the moment. I haven't had to wear my Avulux glasses pretty much at all since I've actually recovered. And that again just shows you like how your threshold changes. And that was like a whole journey in itself. But for a long period of time when I was still struggling and light was an issue for me, they were an absolute lifesaver. So yeah, I would highly recommend anyone looking into Avulux.
And I'll have that linked in the show notes. You can also find that where I'll have your Instagram account linked in the show notes as well. And so they can find that on your page. Yeah,
I was just going to add, I'm not sponsored by Avulux to say any of this, but I am actually an affiliate, which is like always good to disclose. So I actually have a discount code as well if anyone wants to. I always forget that now because it's like, it's an important one to mention, but I've just been like a super fan for a long time. So
yeah, well, it's great. I mean, I didn't know about them until I saw them on your page.
To try them.
So I really, I would love to try them. I'm in front of the screen a lot, so that I think that could be really helpful.
They have so many like cool frames now as well. I always love you've got really cool glasses. So they've got really great frames as well to choose from.
Okay, I love that. So I want to talk about, we were talking about kind of earlier the mental state that you can get into when you're dealing with something like a chronic migraine or migraine attacks and things like that. And I wanted to talk about kind of how you've managed and how you help people manage the mental side of this, because there's the physical, I think, and then I think there's also the mental. We talked about kind of this being scared of pushing thresholds and things like that. I do think that there's a real anxiety that can be wrapped up in migraine. For me, I remember when I came off taking Excedrin migraine, it was like I'd get a headache and I thought I immediately needed the medication. I was kind of trusting myself. I did a lot of breathing. What have you found in your experience with kind of the mind side of this, the mental?
Yeah, so I mean, again, I feel like we could have a whole episode just talking about this. It's actually a really big part of my course, and what I help people with is navigating, one, the impact that migraine is having on people's mental health, because before we kind of get into the fear and everything, like that is huge. It's so common to have depression and anxiety alongside not only migraine, but just if you have chronic pain in general. And I think sometimes, even though most of us know that, it's really helpful to be reminded of that like it's pretty impossible, I think, to have chronic migraine and to have it have that impact on your life and it not to have an impact on your mental health in some way. So there's kind of like lots of stuff that you can do to help specifically with that. And I will always recommend, people seek out professional help if they are really struggling with their mental health. But I think probably it's helpful to talk about that kind of anxiety and that fear element, because that can be such a driving force for keeping people stuck in pain and keeping that migraine big and growing and loud all the time, rather than it calming down. And for me personally, I was aware for years that I was stuck in this fear pain cycle. I was avoiding, I was having an attack, and then I'd become even more fearful, and it just fed each other. And for a long time I was aware of this, but I had no real tools of how to break it. Like, how do I get out? How can I teach my brain that, like, oh, it's okay to take a shower, like, you don't need to be so scared. And I actually retrained my brain, which always sounds a bit woo-woo and a bit strange, but it's not. It's all rooted in neuroscience. And I did something called pain reprocessing therapy, where I essentially retrain my brain and my nervous system that it was safe and that it was okay, and that it didn't need to be constantly sounding the alarm. And that's kind of how I see it. I almost used to visualize in my brain that the little like on-off switch of pain or migraine was just stuck on in my brain. And like, I used to imagine like this little guard was there all the time, looking for danger at every opportunity. That's how my brain lived its life, basically. And it gets stuck in this cycle where, like I said, it's just perceiving danger. And pain reprocessing therapy gives you really specific tools to retrain your brain and teach your brain, like I said, that it's safe. And this has just been like revolutionary to me. It completely took my own recovery from a point where I was still having around 10 attacks a month. I was better than I was. I'd raised my threshold. I was using preventative medication. I was doing so much better, but I was still so debilitated, and I was still avoiding so much of my life. And I wanted more, like, come on, like, there is so much more to life. And the pain reprocessing therapy, in combination with everything else I'd done, really took me into remission from chronic migraine. It finally broke my daily head pain. By this point, I'd had it for over 7 years. Wow. Oh my goodness, enough is enough. Yeah. And I went from having, 20 attacks to 10 attack days a month, to now, in the last few years, I'm only having like one occasionally, like I don't even have one a month anymore. So it's really incredible. And this is the part, I think, that gets so often forgotten about, because people are aware, okay, it's having an impact on my mental health. They're aware it's making them really sad and it's making them anxious, but they don't always they might look to speak to their doctor about their anxiety or go and speak to someone, but they don't normally get given the tools and kind of connect the dots, I don't think, between what's going on mentally, what their thoughts are, what their emotions are, and actually the direct impact that's having on your pain and fueling your migraine cycle.
Right. Now, these tools that you've learned in this therapy, is this something that you teach your students that work with you? Yeah.
So my approach has always been to include both. And I think when I did pain reprocessing therapy for myself, there was a short period of time where I felt like, well, nothing else matters. Like, who cares about devices or supplements or medications? Like, this is the only thing. And that's not true. Like, I've come full circle on that. I truly believe from my own personal experience and from just helping so many people, not just through my course, but through the migraine community, that the fastest and most effective way for people to find relief from their migraine is when they combine all of these, the physical approaches, I like to call them. So the medications, the treatments, the lifestyle changes, the physical tools we can use, the Avulux glasses, all of that. When they do that and they really raise their threshold, and they combine that with the mindset work, with retraining your brain, with reducing the fear, that's when people make progress. And for some people, they've only been focusing on kind of these physical, practical aspects. And I even have a student at the moment in the course who said to me, like, she started this new medication and she's doing so much better. And she's like, but I don't really think it's just the medication, Amy. And I'm saying, like, well, why not? Like, you found this medication, it's working. She's like, because no other preventative medication has worked before. And I'm doing it with all this, I'm doing all the mindset work. She's doing all the brain retraining. And we don't know, is it one, is it the other? But actually, the combination is the thing that I see time and time again that really not only helps people to find relief, but to, I think, really help people take their recovery to a different level and to a point that they don't have to live this kind of small, sheltered life with their migraine anymore. They can really expand their world again and overcome their triggers. And I think the combination also, it gives people the the setup longer term, because if we become reliant on one medication or one tool or one device, like, I never like to almost put this out there because I think it's like a negative outlook, but like, what happens when it stops working? And that's the reality for so many people, sadly. And I never want to scare or kind of even make people think about that, but that is the reality. People have huge success on some medications and then they stop working, or then they lose access to them, and the same with even sometimes some of the physical tools people can use. So I think having multiple tools in your toolbox, whether that's physical ones or these mental tools, really helps people be set up long term with their migraine, which is ultimately what I want from people, not just for you to feel better tomorrow or next week, but like in 10 years time, that you have really good control of your attacks and you're able to enjoy your life. Part of saying all that was, whether you follow me on Instagram and see my posts, or you take my course, or I've got a free masterclass we'll talk about later, I'm sure, all of them will combine both of these approaches. So yes, I talk about brain retraining in the course. I'm certified in PRT myself now, and I support students through this, but it's not just that thing. It's like the combination, because that's what I truly believe helps people.
That's fantastic. And one thing I do think also is that the community aspect of this, more and more science is showing that healing, we heal in connection. In isolation, it's much harder to heal. And so, I do think that reaching out to people and talking about how you've been in pain, or talking about how you have these very bad days, maybe you're in bed all the time, sometimes it can be shameful. Sometimes you can feel very vulnerable expressing a lot of things that are very personal. But I've had it happen to me personally, is that I see a lot of change happens when you reach out and you connect, a lot of growth and healing. What do you feel about that and kind of all the people that you've worked with? Yeah,
I think it's, as you say, so powerful, and it's something we don't talk about enough. The Migraine Life, my page, actually started out of this desire to find someone else who understands what I'm going through. I had like a 2-week-long attack. I was lying in bed on my own, feeling so alone. I didn't know anyone else who had migraine in this way. I think most people know someone else who's had like the occasional attack, but when you suddenly are thrown into the absolute depths of chronic migraine, it feels like, or it can feel like, you are the only person in the world. And starting this little Instagram page, back then there were very few people even talking about migraine on Instagram. Goodness knows why I thought it was a good idea, but I'm so glad I did. But it was really that desire to find just one other person who understood what I was going through. And it is now like turned into this most wonderful community of people from all over the world. And I have done so much work over the years to bring people together, setting up small groups for people to connect with others, different awareness campaigns to bring people together. I think there is so much validation that comes from just being able to speak to someone else who understands what you're going through, and also so much hope. There can be, this is kind of double-edged sword, I think, because you can also surround yourself with people where it's not particularly helpful. I've been in some Facebook groups which are just like horror story after horror story about medication, and almost I used to call it like chronic illness top trumps, people competing like who's the most sick. So that's also another side of the internet and support that can be not helpful. But I have also seen the power of hope in people being supported and surrounded by people who do believe they're going to get better, who are searching for better head days, who are researching, who are educating, who are lifting each other up. And it's why it's such a big part of not only my community on Instagram, but how I help students doing the course. I never wanted it to be just like, here's the information and off you go, because I know that wasn't what was helpful to me. I needed to be to be picked up on bad migraine days. I needed to be able to share a win with someone who didn't, like, it doesn't even sound like a win to be able to eat without earplugs to someone who doesn't get migraine, but for someone who does, it's so powerful to be able to talk to people who understand and who truly get it in a way that's not just, you know, even some family members and friends who do their best to understand, but unless you've lived with it, it's really hard to understand, I think. So yeah, community and support is huge.
Yeah, I think, I hear a lot of women, because I share a lot of information about a lot of different female-led diseases, and I hear women a lot say, well, I don't Google anymore. I don't research anything because I don't want to see the worst case scenario. And while I can understand that, I think it's a really big disservice, because there could be so much information that you can learn to educate yourself to make informed decisions. And you and I are both very aligned of self-advocacy and teaching and sharing information that can help somebody else feel more confident in their own decision about their body. And one thing I've found that helps me a lot is to find 2 or 3 people, either, physicians or somebody on Instagram or somebody that you can trust, that has a community that that you can trust. So you're not going out there on Reddit and finding all the threads that are just like terrible, that are shutting down all of these things that could be possible for you and could help you, but you've heard somebody else's experience, and so you think, no, that's not for me. I just think it doesn't have to be everything on Google that you read, but if you can find some trusted experts and trusted communities, that's such a beautiful place for you to be.
Yeah, I think that's so right. It's just about being mindful about where you're consuming information. Like, learn. That's like the best thing you can do is to educate yourself. It helps in so many ways to just, like, I'm always still learning about migraine, but to just be cautious about where you're consuming it. Just don't read Reddit basically on any day. It's never a good place to be.
So segueing into that, we're going to get to our closing segment, which is the Plug This segment. It's where we offer tangible takeaways to the audience. And speaking of learning, you have a free masterclass that teaches your audience exactly what to do when a migraine attack hits, so that you can feel more in control and find relief faster. And the name of this is your free migraine attack masterclass. I will have this linked in the show notes. You can also find it on Amy's Instagram page, which I will have linked in the show notes. We also talked about your Managing Migraine Survive to Thrive course, which is available in the links. And also, do you want to talk about that for a second?
Yeah, of course. So just if I go back a sec, the masterclass I think is a perfect way to just get a feel about what we've talked about, like combining these like physical approaches but also mental approaches. Most of us, when we are new to migraine, or even if you've had migraine for years, sometimes just think the only thing you can do is just like take a medication and crawl into bed and just have to wait it out. So the masterclass it's only half an hour, it's completely free, and it's just to expand how you're currently managing attacks to help you find relief in different ways alongside taking medication or alternative. The course is really, I get so excited every time I talk about it. The Managing Migraine Survive to Thrive is an online course that I created with ongoing support to help people finally find relief from their migraine and just get back to enjoying their life again. It's everything I wish I'd been given in those first few years when I was diagnosed. So it's education, like all of the stuff we've gone through today, but in more detail about how to identify attacks, how to diagnose, all of the stuff with navigating doctor's appointments, preparing for appointments, all of your treatment options so that you actually go into appointments and you know what to expect, what to ask for, how to access care. We then go into detail about all of the lifestyle changes, basically everything you can be doing to manage migraine yourself at home. We look at how to advocate, how to communicate your needs, how to stand up and explain migraine at work to your friends, your family, and then really the mindset side of things. So how to deal with panic, to deal with grief, to deal with the unpredictable nature of migraine, and then into like the practical tools of pain reprocessing therapy and how to use these alongside everything else you're doing practically to actually start retraining your brain and to break free from the fear pain cycle. So it's kind of your complete roadmap of from like A to B, and alongside that is a really truly wonderful supportive Facebook community, so you can connect with other students, you can ask me questions, and we have students from all over the world. People often ask, can you only join if you're in the UK? Like, no, we've got across Europe, the UK, US, Canada, everywhere. So yeah, come join if you're interested.
It's fantastic. I love that you offer this, and I love that you're so excited to talk about it and sharing. The energy is so positive, and so I can only imagine what it's like inside the course of just you wanting to help people educate and advocate for themselves. It's a beautiful thing. It's really great.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, we're pretty much at the end. I want to ask if there's anything else that you kind of, a final closing thought or something that you'd like to share that we haven't touched on.
I think it would really just be a message of hope, because if you are listening to this, and even if you're someone who thinks like, oh, I've tried a lot of this, I come across a lot of people who feel like, you know, I've had migraine for years, or even maybe you've tried a lot of the treatments, or you've tried a lot of changes. It can feel really like there's nothing else to help you, and that it's just it's something you're just going to have to live with forever. And I just want to let you know that I'm fortunate for the work I do, that I actually get to see people every single week who also feel like they've tried everything, who also have doctors who tell them there's nothing else, who also have had migraine for years and years and years, to find relief and to feel better. And I really just encourage you to keep moving forward, to keep educating yourself, to surround yourself with people who are hopeful, who have recovered, or who are working towards that, who believe in that. There is so much power in who you're surrounding yourself with, and just to not give up. You know, things are constantly evolving in a really exciting way, both in the medical field of research and new treatments, but also our understanding of these more holistic approaches, pain reprocessing therapy. We'll have a new discovery about supplements in the next, like there's things, our knowledge and understanding is evolving, and it's actually, I think sometimes people hate when I say this, but it's a really exciting time. It's a really positive time to have migraine, because we do actually have treatment options that work. People are finding relief. It's not just like try this medication and hope for the best anymore. Like, we understand migraine better than we have ever understand migraine, and there's so much hope for getting better.
That's amazing. I love that. I agree. I think that it's kind of an exciting time to be sick right now, honestly. It sounds terrible, but there's so many things that are coming on.
It sounds bad.
It does. It sounds terrible. But I think it's true, though. There's so many things that are coming. But the caveat to that, to me, is finding the trusted sources, because there's just so much information now. There's floods of information. But I think there's a lot of hope, and also the mind-body connection. I think that's the biggest thing that has emerged in the last decades, is the neuroplasticity, that we can change our brain, we can change these deep grooves that we've had all these years, and that these default modes, and that to me is very exciting.
Yeah, it is. That also, I think, is going to evolve, because I first discovered that link by hearing a doctor talk about it, but doctors don't talk particularly about retraining your brain or pain reprocessing therapy, but they understand the mechanisms, they understand the neuroscience, but there's not quite this link between the two. And I actually think I'm really excited to see this. I'm just excited in general, but to see how Western medicine actually starts connecting more with these mind-body approaches over the next decade, I expect.
Yeah, I could talk to you for a whole other hour and a half. Oh my gosh. Maybe we'll do this again. It's been so nice. Thank you so much for your time, everything that you shared. I've loved this conversation. I know it will be very impactful.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me, Spencer. It's been lovely to chat, and I'm happy to talk about migraine all day, every day, basically. So I hope this is helpful to people who listen, and it can point them in the right directions to get the support and to hopefully, speak up about migraine in their life and get the help they need.
Yeah, well, they're lucky to hear it from you. It's amazing what you're doing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for sharing your time with me today. If something in this episode resonated with you, don't just sit with it. Take action. Comment below, subscribe to our channel, or share it so more women can find conversations like these. You can sign up for the Harry Chin newsletter to stay up to date on everything we're building. And if there's a free cheat sheet connected to this episode, visit theharrychin.com to download. Life takes a village. Thanks for being a part of ours. See you soon.